All right, hi everybody. My name is Antero Garcia. Welcome back to Slam School. We're supposed to be back in 2 weeks, but life does not permit us to wait that long. So I'm gonna have my guest introduce himself, and then we're gonna jump into our topic today.
Hi, I'm Xian Franzinger Barrett. I'm a teacher from Chicago, and I've taught a whole range of subjects. Right now, I'm teaching mostly middle grades and some middle school kids.
Awesome. And Xian, it's good to hear from you. We've known each other through various activities, particularly with the Department of Education several years ago. And you've also been a founding member of edgycolor. And so I've always appreciated kind of your leadership in this space. So thanks for taking a few minutes today.
Yeah, thank you. It's mutual. I mean, just it's always fun to connect on how we can use traditional and newer tools to make the world a better place. So.
Yeah. So speaking to that, I reached out to you today because I saw your article on Alternet, which I will link in our video here. 7 ways teachers can respond to the evil of Charlottesville starting now. For historical purposes, can you talk a little bit about what led to the writing of this article today? Or I guess writing it yesterday.
Sure. I mean, I think like a lot of us, uh, in general, and also specifically teachers of color, like I use Twitter as kind of a way to like survive mental health wise through a lot of the horrendous things that are happening in our society today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, as I was seeing what was unfolding in Charlottesville, I started tweeting a bit about sort of what this might mean for us as educators. And Alternet reached out and said, do you want to turn it into a whole article? I said yes, just because I feel like, a lot of us have very sincere motives about responding to this in a way that stops evil and creates good things, right? But how do we put concreteness to that? Like, what I don't want is for us to feel like we just need to feel better and then go back to the day-to-day of teaching,
Right.
as if that's somehow separate from what's happening in the world.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think partly what I appreciate is the way you find yourself into this essay is by, you talk about not casting blame, and particularly thinking about, talking about Charlottesville isn't for just if you're teaching it with primarily students of color, right? This is a topic that needs to be addressed in all classrooms. And as we get into some of the specifics, I think one of the tensions I have oftentimes when I'm teaching pre-service teachers and newer teachers is this fear that bringing in a topic like this might mean they get fired, right? And issues of repercussion. And I know you've had your fair share of having conversations with administrators in the past. Do you have any tips on that initial, hesitancy to have these kind of politicized conversations?
I mean, I think that's that's the side of it where I tend to overplan a lot. When it comes to working with the students, I make sure I'm very prepared, especially on issues like this. But also, I'm ready for them to organically interact with it because they're good at doing that, right?
Yeah.
However, I do tend to prepare a lot in terms of what is the conversation I would have with an administrator. In the same way as we teach students, whether it be mathematics or world language or arts, or specifically reading and writing, right? Language arts. It helps to alleviate anxiety and fear to actually go through the steps ahead of time and say, you're likely to feel anxiety writing, and so here's how we deal with that. And so in the same way on these type of topics, both myself but also working with colleagues in my affinity groups, like edgycolor,
Yep.
go through these situations and kind of say, well, if there is pushback here, how do we address that, and how do we tie it back to education as we all believe it, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think one of the things you're kind of invisibly doing, that I'm just going to kind of pull out for audience members, is you're pointing to these kinds of larger networks, all right? As you're thinking through kind of, being on your toes and being ready for these conversations, you've got entire resources and other individuals who are doing this work across the country, across the globe, that you can reach out to, right? And so one of your first tips is, I guess these sound like BuzzFeed tips, but they're like foundational pieces to engage in. is thinking about looking at the curated hashtag Charlottesville curriculum. Have you seen pretty useful resources on that space as you've been following that hashtag the last couple of days?
Absolutely. I think that it's something that has developed out of Twitter over time, that not just for Charlottesville, but so many of the other current events that are coming down. As educators process it, a lot of people have been throwing great resources onto similar hashtags. So
Yeah.
I encourage colleagues to not only look at that particular hashtag, but also look for the curriculum and syllabus hashtags that come out frequently around current events.
Yeah.
And remembering, we should respond and integrate current events into our practice. Also, the Ferguson syllabus hashtag is still incredibly relevant and vital. And so it's possible to go through these hashtags and build a whole year-long course syllabus if you care to approach it that way.
Yeah, and when you say we, you're not talking about, you're pretty clear that this isn't just humanities teachers, right? You're talking every subject should be doing this, right? If you're a math teacher, if you're a science teacher, this is our curriculum, right?
Absolutely, and I think it cuts to the fundamental idea that students learn better when they're engaged with their own passions. And when you look at a student who's deeply engaged in math, it's usually because it connects to their life in some strong way. And so what better way to apply mathematics than to addressing these social issues that are facing a lot of our students and each other.
Awesome, thanks. And I think the next tip I want to jump into is this idea that, so even though it's Charlottesville curriculum, I think your next tip really focuses on how do you center these conversations in your current school context, right? So the first sentence is of this second tip is audit our own classrooms, schools, and communities, and then take action. Do you have examples of what that means or what that can look like, and what counts as action, I guess?
Absolutely. So in terms of the auditing, I mean, out of it's as simple as establishing very concrete ways of dealing with students, and students being able to be open and honest about their own critiques of our classroom environments. Mm-hmm. I think when you bring that type of technique, though, to issues of race, class, and other identities and systems of oppression, a lot of teachers start to get nervous or concerned. And what I just emphasized is that there's no reason that we shouldn't look at the way that our student interacts, our school interacts with students around issues of race, in the same way that we look at interaction with standards, or look at interaction with traditional curricula. So I want to know, it's hard to see, but if the female students in my classroom feel like that I'm not connecting to them properly and I'm showing sexism in my approach to teaching, that hurts to hear, but it hurts a lot more to find out later I've been teaching poorly, right? And hurting students. And so I really encourage people to approach these, even though it's difficult. And then when we talk about action, I think that's where do the audit, try not to worry about the action first, and then seek help through these networks, right? It is not reasonable to expect a single teacher to look and say, wow, our faculty is 99% white. And I'm now that I'm assessing that doesn't feel right. Now I need to fix it, right? Like that's not a fair expectation. Yeah. But as we reach through networks, we can learn from each other how to address those situations.
Awesome. That's super helpful, and I appreciate that. And I think you speak to another tip you talk about here, and that's the create classrooms that students feel safe to share in, but are not conducive to the spread of hatred. And I think that environment, and again, you point to really powerful resources of how to do that. And so I appreciate this connection of that action doesn't have to be this individual, that when it's about taking action, it's not you out there by yourself, right? That this is a we kind of movement, right? And this is a movement Absolutely. That historically comes over time, which so thinking about this as a movement and thinking about these individual steps as part of a larger network, this gets to one of your later suggestions, which is really about thinking about how we need to reject tools that are embracing white supremacy within our classroom. And I don't know if you're talking about this here, but I see this tied to specific policy issues at the state, at the national, and probably at the local level, depending on the kinds of contexts we're in. Is that what you're talking about here?
That's exactly right. And it's one of the ironies of the piece going viral is that I've seen folks from the exact agencies that are enforcing white supremacy sharing this as a resource to fight white supremacy. And, to get very specific about that, I teach an environment where a lot of students are multi-language emerging learners.
Yeah.
And when we look at tools like PARC, which are English only, they can be devastating to students' confidence and also their sense of, that this whole system is fair in general. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important that we look at the assumptions around us, how they support white supremacy and in many ways undermine our students. And I hate to do this, but I'm actually getting someone's knocking loudly on the window. Can I pause it real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, we're back after a mysterious window knocking. So I think we're talking about how resources around dismantling white supremacy can come out of this practice, right? And I think the one feeling I could have as I'm thinking again about some new teachers is I'm seeing and feeling overwhelmed emotionally by what I'm seeing happening in Charlottesville. And I'm hearing some concrete ways to think about this in my classroom, and that's a big step. And then I'm hearing that this is also tied to larger systems of oppression and white supremacy that are funneling into the teaching profession. And that to me might feel like a lot. Do you have a sense of how I can maybe not feel overwhelmed and also maybe deal with some self-care around these issues?
I mean, I always keep coming back to affinity groupings, and it's not just a sort of maxim that I keep stating, but it's just my own experience is that these issues we are dealing with can be soul crushing, right? Yeah. But having other educators who have our backs and can help us walk through this is vital, both for these bigger issues and also just, the aspects of our profession, like the fact that people will tell first-year teachers, oh, you're only crying once a week? That's really low, right? To me, there's not a profession that anyone should hear that, unless... Yeah. And so with that being the case, I think we can all do better at supporting each other, and that creating those relationships. And you really laid out well the sort of different areas this is hitting in, right? Mm-hmm. And I would encourage those watching this to just thoughtfully consider those different pieces and how they fit together. Because if I'm trying to unload all this emotion I'm feeling and have not consensually arranged that with my colleague who I just then lay it all out for, that may be messing with their self-care, right?
Yeah.
But if we're communicating well on this and supporting each other, I think it can go well.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And I think, so one place where I think about this is it seems like find those colleagues who are going to be critical and engage in this work with you locally, and also find them, I think, in online spaces. And to that extent, I'm wondering, for maybe the 1% of folks who don't know, could you explain what edgycolor is as a community for people who haven't heard of it?
Sure. So edgycolor is most known as an organization led by educators of color fighting for educational equity, specifically in the Twitter space, right? We run a monthly chat. The hashtag is always, full of all sorts of suggestions of how to process things going on in society and integrate it with classroom practice. That said, the organization started with a few of us based around these exact issues we're talking about tonight, which is how do we as educators of color survive day to day in workspaces where systemically it's not really welcoming to us, right? And so it started out with a lot of emails and sharing through social media, just affirming each other that, you're in this for the good fight and you're doing well, and please keep doing what you're doing. And so I think, a lot of times now with social media, people say, well, social media spaces aren't real spaces like real life. But that's very blurred these days, right? And the affirmation that you can give and receive from colleagues on social media can be not only real, but concretely real enough to support mental health and improve our instruction in the classroom. And maybe, as we continue to work together, change the world for the better.
Yeah, I love that. And I appreciate that optimism and that hope, and I appreciate your leadership in that space. So Xian, thank you so much for your time. I suspect it will be bothering you numerous times down the road. So
never a bother. It's always a pleasure to see you. So
awesome. Yeah, it's good to see you too. Take care.
thanks. You too.
All right, bye-bye.